Welcome to Independent Sources. I'm Garry Pierre-Pierre.
And I'm Vianora Vinca. Junked and ashen cars used as barricades, bullets flying as gunmen and Jamaican police stand off amidst zinc fences. All over one man, the alleged drug baron Christopher Dudus Coke. Tivoli Gardens residents and members of Coke's Shower Posse gang essentially hijacked the country as they protected this beloved fugitive.
On this edition of Independent Sources, we examine why this alleged criminal Don has nearly been able to bring Kingston to its knees.
We talk about why the rise in AIDS, HIV figures in Black and Hispanic communities in New York is not drawing more media attention. Then we see how a Kuwaiti psychologist is trying to save Islam's image in a single bound. We'll have those stories and news of the week right after this.
Ethnic media is a key, necessary, most relevant component to any democracy. And I know it's a painful shift for many people in this country. But now more than ever, we need coverage that comes from ethnic and immigrant press.
Recent violence in Jamaica has highlighted the influence of so-called dons in communities on the island. These wanted men often provide money and food for the poor in communities where they live. They've even been known to get residents out to vote. It's those deeds that make a man like Christopher Dudus Coke more messiah than murderer to many people in Tivoli Gardens. Here with me in studio to discuss this relationship between these alleged criminals and their communities is Tony Best of CaribNews. And joining us from Jamaica via telephone is Janella Precius of CVM TV. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Janella, let me start with you. You take issue with the coverage of the situation in Jamaica by the American and the international media. What's wrong with it?
Thanks for having me, first of all. There have been quite a number of inaccuracies in the reporting from the international media. They're giving the impression that this situation is affecting all of Jamaica, where it is when it is actually affecting just a small part of downtown Kingston called Tivoli Gardens. Okay. We were quite upset last week. We had a reporter from the BBC reporting from Montego Bay. Now, Montego Bay is one of the tourism meccas of the Caribbean. And he was reporting about the happenings in Kingston. And as a result of that report, quite a number of visitors canceled their trips to Jamaica. The diaspora in New York, Canada, all over the first world countries, they had also taken issue with it because there was this panic. So you got the impression that the entire Jamaica was under lockdown and, the war and the Armageddon, that sort of thing. So there was a whole lot of sensationalization of what is happening in this tiny section of Kingston, Jamaica called Tivoli Gardens.
Tony, the New York Times headed that the Jamaican government and these alleged crime bosses have long teamed up. Is that accurate?
Well, let's step back for a second. There is some degree of accuracy when they suggest that this is not a new problem, that there is a relationship between criminality and political activity. But as Janella pointed out, that relates to only a small section of Jamaica in West Kingston. It is entirely inaccurate to suggest that the political environment in Jamaica is saturated with criminality. That is not true.
Well, what about the report that Dudus helped the current Prime Minister come to power?
Well, I don't know that you could say that he helped the current Prime Minister come to power. What he may have done is he supported the current Prime Minister in Tivoli Gardens. But that's a stretch to say that he helped him to come to power. He supported him in Tivoli Gardens, which is the Prime Minister's constituency. But he certainly, what brought the Jamaica Labour Party to office, in my view, is a sense that the people of Jamaica wanted a change in government. I don't know for sure, but Adulis and his cohorts or allies may have provided some support for the Prime Minister in that constituency, but not across the country.
All right, I just want to add to what Tony said. I just want to explain to Vianora how the garrison politics work. Whether or not, it doesn't matter who is running the garrison, in the garrisons, they vote one way. You get me? They vote one way. They vote either JLP or PNP. So you have JLP garrisons or PNP garrisons. So it really doesn't matter who is put in the seats. They vote one way.
And who dictates which way the people vote?
Well, there is a history there. Tivoli Gardens has always voted JLP. The communities around it, they vote for the opposition, the People's National Party. Now, interestingly, this used to be a People's National Party stronghold until Mr. former Member of Parliament, Edward Siaga, he's also a former Prime Minister, until he came into that area. Quite a few analysts blame him for what you call now the garrisonization of Tivoli Gardens. They blame him. They think that he is one of the persons who has to be held responsible for the whole issue of garrisons and donmanship in the inner cities.
Well, let's talk more about the relationship between these dons and the people. Christopher Dada's Coke has been ruling based on violence, corruption, and philanthropy. Do people prefer having him around and run things as opposed to the government?
I can tell you this much, Vianora. It's interesting that in this same community that we speak of, the crime, major crime, is on an all-time low. So I'm not sure if they have their own justice system in there, but then you don't have that many major crimes in that community. And I'm speaking about murders, robbery, incest, rape, and these sort of crimes. It is at an all-time low. You get a sense that the persons there prefer his type of justice as opposed to the police. Yes, recently there was this huge protest in downtown Kingston, and persons were saying that, you know what, we will die for Dodos. He sends our children to school. If I have no money, he gives me money. They actually prefer him than the politician. Now, because this area is a JLP stronghold, they will vote yes, but then you get a sense that he is like their messiah, so to speak.
Tony, what have been some of the reactions in the community here to the situation in Jamaica?
I think that I've had extensive conversations with Jamaicans here, and they are, one, embarrassed by it all. Two, they're angry. They're angry at the current Prime Minister for not addressing the issue of Dulles before, when the United States first put the request in for his extradition. But they're also realistic in that they understand, as Janelle pointed out, that the two political parties in Jamaica, beginning with the Jamaica Labour Party, introduced the concept of the garrison politics. You know, it may be opportunistic to blame the current government and the current Prime Minister for everything, but the reality is that this is something that goes back, I would say, 2 decades.
Janella, just very quickly in a few words, if you could, please, are these dons with the influence that we hear they can exercise over the government and their neighborhoods, are they trying to influence journalists in general times?
No, never have been. Well, the only experience that we've had was during the unrest in downtown Kingston. they would allow us to get a few shots of the area, but then we can't point out cameras in certain directions, and they would give us a time. So when they say move, we move. We've never had any encounter with Mr. Coke. We don't even know what he looks like. But I just want to go back to a point quickly to what Tony was saying. There is a view that whether or not the Prime Minister had signed or had given the authorization for the extradition warrants to go ahead, that it would have played out the same way based on the relationship that persons living in Tivoli Gardens have with Dudas. And interestingly also is that you have persons from Hannahtown and these other communities in support of Dudas, because apparently he has helped to bring peace, if you wish, in a lot of the garrison communities, and I'm talking about PNP and JLP communities in downtown Kingston. So his influence is really, really great.
Janella Precius and Tony Best, thank you both for being here.
It's always a pleasure.
Now, thank you very much.
Now here's Abi Ishola with some other news.
Thanks, Vianora. Here's a look at some headlines from the ethnic media. Governor Patterson wants to restore the budget for New York state parks. The Amsterdam News reports that Patterson has proposed that $6 million of the Environmental Protection Fund be allocated to have several state parks reopened. But lawmakers say it's impossible considering the state's $9.2 billion deficit. Funding for 57 parks was cut as a result of the 2010-2011 budget. From Russian Bazaar, foreign students with J-1 visas that allow them to work temporarily in the United States will have a hard time finding jobs this year. The Bureau of Labor Statistics says these students will be competing for work in diners and hotels with countless unemployed Americans and undocumented immigrants. J-1 visa holders are being advised to look for jobs in rural areas like Iowa and Oklahoma, or small developed cities like Orlando and Atlanta. Brazil has given the Haiti Reconstruction Fund a major boost. Caribbean Life reports that the country donated $55 million to the fund set up by the World Bank to help Haiti rebuild after the devastating earthquake. The World Bank says, though Brazil was the first country to contribute to the fund, 14 other countries are expected to chip in. And finally, from the Forward, a large number of non-Jews are raising Jewish children. In an op-ed piece, Jennifer Thompson points out that the number of interfaith marriages among Jews reached over 40% in the year 2000. 1/3 of those couples are raising their children as Jews. Thompson says the Jewish community should continue to create programs that educate and encourage intermarried couples in their Jewish practices. Those are just a few headlines from the ethnic media. Back to you, Gary.
Thanks, Abby. AIDS statistics in New York City's Black and Hispanic communities are skyrocketing. Recent figures from the city's health department estimate that 80% of new cases diagnosed come from those communities. Yet, there seems to be little attention given to these startling statistics in the mainstream and ethnic media. I recently sat down with Nayaba Arinde of the Amsterdam News and Claudia Cruz of El Correo de Queens to talk about AIDS coverage in their communities. Before we start this discussion, I want to read a paragraph from New York City's Department of Health website, where it says here, New York City is an epicenter of AIDS and HIV in the United States. There are more AIDS cases in New York than Los Angeles, San Francisco, Miami, and Washington, D.C. combined. But you wouldn't read that in the daily newspapers or on the TV. Why do you think that's the case?
I think there's probably a case of AIDS fatigue, and I think because there are so many drugs which have been helping people live longer, they say, people just assume it's okay and it's over and we don't have to worry about it, and even if you do catch anything, you can treat it with drugs. So let's move on to the next issue. You know, so I just think there's a definite AIDS fatigue. Even the walk yesterday, well, on Sunday, it got a little bit of coverage, but not as much as I thought it might get. You know, I don't know how many people came out. I know they raised $5 million. I think it's the 25th anniversary, and yet there was hardly any coverage of it. So I don't know if it's the fatigue. I don't know if people are just tired. I don't know if people just think, okay, let's move on to the next issue. You know, so I'm not quite sure.
And Claudia, what do you think?
I think that I agree. In the Latino community in particular, there are an increased number of HIV/AIDS cases, but it's in the undocumented population, and they're afraid to come forward. So sometimes, the numbers are there. The Department of Health has the statistics, but it's not, they're not hard statistics. There aren't too many people who want to talk, definitely not to their doctors or to community organizations, and definitely not to the press. There's still stigmas to having the disease. So it's a silent, one of those, maybe here in New York, it's one of those silent killers. And the numbers are there, they just aren't being.
Well, perhaps with the mainstream press, we can say that there's some level of fatigue, but for the ethnic press, for instance, the Amsterdam News, do you cover it much? Or?
We do. We had a story last week about a man with HIV who's being allowed to adopt a child. I think the week before we had another story. It's with us, it's a given that we're going to do the stories. We had another story a while ago about a young lady who's been living with the disease for like 20 years. We were debating whether we should put it on the front page or not. And we decided we shouldn't put it on the front page because if we did, people would say, oh, well, if you can live for 20 years on drugs, let's go ahead and have unprotected sex. Because even if I catch something, I'm good because I'm covered. So we had that debate of whether we should push this story for the front page or not. I kind of wanted to because I thought it was inspirational. But the decision was made to not because of the reason I've just said. People thinking, okay, well then it's.
Claudia, I noticed that a lot of the campaigns in AIDS education is targeting women. What is happening among women in the Latino or in general population?
Well, that's great that you brought that up because I know that the Department of Health put out a survey, a study about 2 weeks ago, that the number of women getting HIV has increased due to their unprotected sex. One, in general, and then also because they're having unprotected anal sex. They just know there's more men using condoms, men to men, homosexual men, who are aware that they have to wear condoms if they're going to have anal sex. But there's fewer women are practicing that habit. So yes, the numbers are increasing in the number of women. And as far as then again, going back to the Latino community, I know there's a couple of figures a few years back about the number of African American women being one of the highest, the fastest at-risk groups. Latino women are following just behind because there's still stigmas with machismo and not telling your man to wear a condom. There are Latino men, particularly Central American, Mexican, Cuban, and here in the U.S., who are on the down low, but that hasn't been discussed much in the Latino community. So these women are going home thinking that their husbands are not having sex with anybody else, whether it's a woman or a man. But now their numbers are increasing at just the same speed.
I wanted to pick up on this point, this debate you were having about where to place that story about the young lady who had been living with AIDS. Why? I mean, why would you think there was?
I mean, it was a question of whether we put it on the front page or whether we put it on. I think it was page 4. It ended up on. I think, and the debate was with the editorial was whether whether putting it on the front page would mean that people thought, okay, I can go ahead and have unprotected sex because look, here's an example of somebody who has HIV and takes the drugs and she's surviving. So why am I worried about this? So it was a debate. Do you know what I mean? And like I said, we ended up putting on page 4. I think we had a nice picture of her. And it was just, a concern as to how our community was going to accept it, being that the increase, there was an increase in women. And so the consideration was, what message are we sending if we say, go ahead and, you can do what you want because this lady right here is surviving. So I don't know, I kind of wanted to put it on the front page, but some of the editorial staff didn't want to do that.
I think I would agree with the decision too, because not only is there fatigue, but sometimes people think it's still a tough topic to talk about. So even if someone is living with AIDS, unless they're flipping through the pages and they bump into the story, maybe they won't pick up the paper if it's on the cover.
I know.
Well, I mean, but part of what we do is to inform and educate people. So, I mean, whatever it is, no? It is what it is.
I know, but staggering numbers, I think, I just think back to AIDS in the 1990s. They'll have these huge numbers, like 25,000 are dying, or 25,000 newly diagnosed. that might make someone pick up the paper. But I agree, if someone who's been living with a disease, the impact is great, it's wonderful, but it's not informing as to behavior.
Do we have a moral obligation as ethnic media reporters or editors to write about this issue?
I think so. I think we have to try and inform the community on whatever issue. But there's another side to it where there's a group of people who believe that AIDS was man-made, and that there's a whole industry behind the drugs. And they do say that it's not HIV that takes you out; it's knowing that you have something, and it's the fear and the worry and the stress and all of that. And some people cannot afford the drugs, so there's a whole other debate going on about, you know, who benefits from pushing the whole AIDS pandemic.
Claudia?
I think that we do have a moral obligation to talk about it, just like any other disease. But again, with the numbers not decreasing, I mean, we've been living with the AIDS epidemic at least 30 years, a good 30 years now, and you would think that the people would be more careful, and they're not being more careful. So it is still our obligation, particularly this one, despite that someone can live for 20 years, not everyone has access to the drugs. They can still be very expensive. And there are people who aren't going to doctors or even getting tested. So I think the more we, you know, it doesn't have to be full feature stories, but just briefs, like this just came out, you should know about this.
Unfortunately, we had to leave it there. Claudia Cruz of the Correo de Queens, Nayaba Arinde of the Amsterdam News, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.
As you know, paper comes from trees.
Paper comes from trees.
Paper comes from trees. Every time trees are destroyed to make paper, we lose something that can't be replaced.
We lose the air we breathe.
The soil that grows our food. Wildlife. And our home.
And their home.
You have the power to stop this.
You have the power to stop this.
You have the power to stop this. Insist that the paper you buy is tree-free. Insist on it.
Insist on it.
Help us win the paper campaign.
And finally from us tonight, part 2 of our Keep the Faith series. When things go wrong in the full-colored world of comic books, Clark Kent usually announces, "This looks like a job for Superman." But after 9/11, Kuwaiti psychologist Dr. Naif Al-Mutawa didn't think even the Men of Steel could handle the damage that incident had done to Islam's image in the real world. That's when he created the 99, a group of multicultural Muslim heroes powered by the 99 different attributes of Allah. Zyphus Lebrun tells us more.
The heroes of the 99 have one of the mightiest tasks ever hoisted upon a champion's shoulders. They're charged with reclaiming Islam's image from extremists who've turned the faith into something dark and frightening since September 11th.
Whoever took down those towers took down the way I want Islam to be remembered for my children. And so it became, for me, the superheroes came as a direct response. We went back to the same material that other people have pulled out negative, intolerant, murderous messages, and in their place have put positive, multicultural, tolerant messages.
These messages are not just for Westerners. They're also for young Muslims who see their religion as harsh and intolerant.
This self-identification will be very, very, very painful in the next generation, because what you see as extremism today will be nothing. That'll become your moderate. And so you need to peg it.
To that end, the books are printed in several languages, including Turkish and Chinese, and distributed around the world. The characters are also multinational Muslims. They include Nura, the Light, from the United Arab Emirates, Mumita, the Destroyer, from Portugal, and Jabbar, the Powerful, from Saudi Arabia. They're all powered by stones that help them manifest different abilities linked to Allah's attributes.
things like generosity and mercy and foresight and wisdom and dozens of others that all human beings see as something good.
Even though the series is based on religious tenets, the books shy away from including references to religion at all.
All successful superhero properties are based on religious archetypes, but don't use religion in the storylines. If you get into religion and behavior, that's what separates us. So even though it's coming from the same place, it comes out differently, and that's where you have the frictions. And so by basing it on values, those values that Islam shares with the rest of humanity, right, then it's something that brings people together.
So far, it seems to be working. The book has spawned an amusement park and a soon-to-be-released animated series. President Obama recently singled out the comic and the creator for their inventive response to his efforts to strengthen ties with the Muslim world.
I have to say, perhaps the most innovative response was from Dr. Naif Al-Mutawa of Kuwait, who joins us here tonight. His comic books have captured the imagination of so many young people with superheroes who embody the teachings and tolerance of Islam.
It's not all kudos and congratulations. There are fundamentalist Muslims who say that Al-Mutawa is putting himself at risk by publishing the comic book. One cleric in particular has called the 99 blasphemous.
This is the territory where the Muslims will never tread because of the complete difference between our culture and the Western culture. We can see that idols, music, drawing, acting is part of the Western culture. This is not part of our culture.
Al-Mutawa says that's seeing Islam in black and white, and deflects those criticisms as Jabbar would a bullet. It's this simplistic view of Islam that caused him to abandon his faith briefly when he was 19.
And then an imam I went to listen to gave a sermon about how, if you asked him if usury or paying interest was haram against Islam, he'd tell you yes, and he'd quote you chapter and verse. And then he said, but if I didn't pay interest on my car, I couldn't be here today to talk to you. And I was shocked. As simple of an idea as that is, that's one of those pivots that changed my life forever. Because it showed me there was a gray area, and I didn't have to go based on this guy or that guy interpretation. I can have my own.
Now, his interpretation, clad in cool costumes and wielding wondrous powers, will soon make an even greater splash in the American market. Comic book giant DC will team their icons Batman and Superman with the 99 in an upcoming comic in their fight for truth, justice, and the Islamic way. Zyphus Lebrun, Independent Sources.
That's our show. Thanks for joining us, and we hope to see you again next week.
In the meantime, be independent-minded.